Okay, I think that we're pretty much live here today. I know we're probably a couple seconds early, but I just wanted to get the show started here today. I wanted to tell people that if you're going to ask me questions on the live stream here, that if you could just make sure that you put a at We the Governed in the question, that tends to make it just a little bit easier for me to be able to get your question answered. We're kind of in this new studio space here. We don't really have the new studio set up, so I'm very excited to just be in a new location, kind of getting back to a little bit bigger area to do some of these live streams and to actually do some of my video filming. So this is a big step up for me. I'm very excited about it. Of course, I live in the charity of others, so I'm fortunate to have some of the studio space donated to me, but for me to use on occasion, and I really appreciate all the help that I get when I'm doing that. And for those who have watched some of the past episodes, this was really bothering me. I made an error a couple episodes ago, and I've been meaning to correct myself on it. But I had mentioned that Dan Evans was the last Republican governor at the time. And the reason why, I mean, it's kind of funny to me that I did that, but I did. And it was actually Governor Spellman, as I was corrected while I was on the show by people in the comment section. So that was an error on my part. It's funny because as a kid, I kind of remember Dixie Lee Ray, who was a Democrat governor before Spellman was elected. I don't remember Spellman at all. So for whatever reason, just as a kid, I completely forgot him as a governor, as a Republican governor. And so Spellman was the last Republican governor of Washington State. There's two events coming up this week. If you're in Walla Walla, I'll be speaking out there Wednesday evening, and I believe that's with a local Republican Party chapter doing a presentation out there Wednesday evening. I think it starts around 5 o'clock, but you'll have to double check what their schedule is. And then on Friday in Kitsap County at the Lincoln Day Dinner, I believe that I'm co-emceeing with maybe a presentation out there at the same time. That's why I'm not going to see people at the Thurston County Lincoln Day Dinner, which normally I would be at the same time, because I'm not going to be able to be there just because it's a scheduling conflict and Kitsap County got to me first. So anyway, I figured I would just mention that to everybody, and in case you didn't know. And then I'm also going to turn off my phone because it seems like it's inevitable that it's going to ring if I don't make sure it's turned off here. And that is just the way things go here. Make sure it's turned down. So let's get to some of the questions that we have here. There was a question that somebody mentioned here about when somebody is elected to office, say state senate, does the person go through training? And I wonder if all elected people just make things up as their daily jobs. And the answer to that is they do go through training, but it varies depending on which type of position they're elected to. There's a couple different types of training that they go through. And training consists of a number of different things. In Washington State, there's a mandatory training that they do right now for Open Public Meetings Act and Public Records Act law. It was implemented a couple years ago. Now it's a number of years now. And so everybody who's elected to office has to learn about the especially local government, school board, city council, county commission, things like that. And so they do this training session. And there's a liability reason for it. They're just trying to reduce the mistakes that are made by elected officials in violating either the Open Public Meetings Act or in violating the Public Records Act. And that training is pretty simple, pretty basic, but it's still some training that they do. If you are elected to the state legislature in either the House or the Senate, both of them, they have orientation programs that they put those elected officials through. And they also do, the individual caucuses do their own training as well. And that's going to vary a little bit as far as the significance of that training. You'll also see, if you're in an elected official, like at a school board position, there's associations that most of these elected officials are in. There's Association of Cities, if you're a city council member, say, Association of Cities and Counties. So a lot of times they have association training that they put people through. MRSC, which is the Municipal Research Service, will do some types of training. It's actually a really good, for those of you who want to learn more about local government, that's a great website to go to. Just look up MRSC and you can learn a lot about local government in Washington State. It's a pretty handy reference. Not everything they put up is correct, but it's at least a good place to start if you're completely unfamiliar, you don't know where to start. If you're in the school board, and there's a lot of school directors, almost 1,500 school directors in Washington State. They have WASDA, which is the Washington State School Directors Association. They're going to have some types of training that you go to at their conferences. You'll see sometimes the bureaucracy tries to do their own training on these elected officials. So when they get into office, that they do kind of what the elected officials want them to do. I'm a little negative on some of that types of training because I think the bureaucrats want the elected officials to be uninvolved in the day-to-day stuff in running government, and they certainly don't want them to exercise their legislative authority. And they really do try to get manipulated. I would say in most cases, especially in cities and counties and school boards, in many cases, they get manipulated a lot by the bureaucracy. And so sometimes that's a shortcut way for elected officials to not be as familiar with their duties and responsibilities and what their authority really would allow them to do as an elected official. And bureaucrats will oftentimes try to cut them out of the loop or reduce that scope in which they can operate. And they'll do that if they think that you're a conservative and you're trying to shrink the size of government. They'll really intervene. If they think that you're a leftist and you want to bloat government and expand the budget, they'll let you go crazy. So that's kind of how it operates. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm a little less impressed with most of these training programs. But at the legislative level, the state legislative level, they go through quite a bit of training up there, and they don't just wing it, even if they look like they are. They get a lot of extra training on that. There's a question down here that said something about, and I mentioned earlier in the comment section, if you do have suggestions for me on stories for some of my videos that you want me to cover, feel free to throw those out there too. And I'm always curious to see what people want to hear, what they're interested in seeing more stories about. I'm happy to, you might give me a new idea, and that's always good. There's a question here from Jason. And by the way, that last question was from Cristiano. So thank you, Cristiano, for sending that in. Jason is asking a question here about on the debt bill, totally pissed that McCarthy caved. What was the point of the House passing the first bill and not waiting for the Senate to pass their own version? Well, Jason, I think it's probably at the federal level, gosh, the budget negotiations that go on at the federal level are incredibly complicated and dynamic. And there's no way, if you want to really cut the budget at the federal level, and I don't think very many people who go to Washington, D.C. really do, but let's pretend for argument's sake that there's enough of them that actually want to cut that budget. They have to genuinely go in and cut it aggressively. And it's a little bit hard to do that if you don't have both houses under control. There's some under the same party control. The advantage of the 90s, when Gingrich was in there, and some of the cuts that they legitimately got back then, were really because I really think that the contract with America was a pretty genius move in the way that it was implemented at the time. What happens, though, and this really reminds me of kind of what the Reagan experience was. When Reagan got elected in 1980, he did come into Washington, D.C. with this whole group of people, and their goal was to cut government in a lot of ways. And that was a great theory. But what happened, they found, is that as they were trying to cut government, at least the way it's been written about in books since that time, that they would find a program that they thought, this is one we're going to cut. And then there would always be some Republican that would come forward and say, no, there's something really good about that program. We got to keep it. And so in the end, you always had some defenders in your own party that was willing to defend it. And that made it a lot harder for them to cut down the size of government. And I think that that's one of the challenges that you have to overcome if you're planning to go in and actually shrink the size of government. On the debt bill, the debt limit bill, the big drama that they've exaggerated, I think, in some ways over the last few months, at the federal level, it's not cutting what those of us who want less government or smaller government, it doesn't really cut that much. What you have is they inflate the amount of growth of government from previous budgets. And then if you decrease that growth at all, at the end of the world is coming and there's high drama and all the lobbyists come forward and make a big deal out of it. And so that's the issue that you end up dealing with at the federal level. I think it's just a much, much more complicated process. there's a lot of drama back in DC. There's a lot of nuance associated with how they do these things. I'm never really happy with the lack of ability to cut the government at all at the federal level, and yet that's where we have to do it. And I don't think that there's really as much of a problem of defaulting on the debt the way that it's exaggerated in DC. The only thing that would really affect the default on the debt is this ability to not pay, to genuinely not make payments on the debt. If you were to take an agency and just not pay the bills for that agency, especially if it's one, if it's a useless agency, which is a good percentage of them, nobody's going to probably notice that and care. I mean, I'm sure some of the people that work there would, but mostly they don't. I mean, there's so much waste in DC that it just needs to be chopped down a lot. By the way, at the state level, Washington state level, for example, they negotiate a state budget. There's actually 3 budgets that they negotiate. One's a transportation budget, which is segmented into a separate fund, mainly because you have federal money that comes into it. You have a capital assets budget, which is essentially for building durable long-term projects like buildings or something significant. And then you have the general fund budget. And the general fund is where the bloat and the big waste is really at. And there's different rules for each of those 3 budgets. And so that's why when you're looking at state budgets, those are the 3 that you're arguing about in Olympia. And capital assets in particular is a higher threshold for approving those budgets. And so because of that higher threshold, the Republicans have some influence over how the capital budget is functioning, or at least how the money is allocated there. The Republicans, when they have a small, they're in the smaller level of minority right now in Washington state, they have less influence over the transportation and the general fund budget. In the past, just a couple of years ago, when the Republicans nominally had control of the state Senate, there was a lot more control over both budgets, and there was some influence that Republicans had on it. But it's a different thing. Washington state, in theory, can't go into debt, so you don't see a debt the way, because we don't print money in Washington. We may print crazies in Seattle, but we don't print money in Washington. So you're not going to see the Washington state go into a debt situation the way you do at the federal level. Okay, TZ, thank you. I'm glad you like seeing this live. I do want feedback on these live streams. Just let me know if you think that you're getting value out of these live streams or not. There's essentially 2 ways to easily talk to me. One's, I guess, through this live stream process. And the other way is I do a lot of public presentations around the state, and that's a good way for you to come and see me and get a chance to talk to me in person and ask questions there. And I usually take questions in public wherever I'm at. So I'm fairly used to that. There's another question around here. Ryan, you're asking the question, is there any hope of eliminating mail-in voting here in Washington? Is there anything that can be done on the initiative front to transform and reform it? Good question. Okay, so there's 2 questions there. Is there any hope of eliminating mail-in voting here in Washington? Yes, but not right away. And so when I say that, there's 2 paths that exist, I think, right now, potentially are going to affect mail-in voting. The most likely path that would have the quickest impact on Washington state has nothing to do with our state at all. It has to do more with these federal cases and decisions that I think are going to be made by other federal courts in regards to some of the mail-in processes and the real problem with chain of custody issues associated with mail-in voting and other problems from other states. Washington takes the worst of everything and puts it in one place. And so some of these other states are rejecting it in some of these lawsuits that are going on about mail-in voting or absentee voting. And I think that's one way you could have disparate treatment kind of approach. They would come in through one of those federal lawsuits that could affect Washington, even if we don't have the votes here. The other thing is the support for mail-in voting is decreasing recently. It was actually increasing. Majority of Republicans liked it before. That's no longer true. And there's still a majority of people, when you do surveys, that do like mail-in voting because of the convenience mainly. But I think that's shrinking a little bit as some of these problems come about. It, regardless of what the media wants to say, there's some recognition that there's some problems there. But it's going to take some work and a lot of effort, and it just takes a lot of work. TZ, you're asking a question, where do we count the mail-in ballots and who counts the ballots? The ballots are counted in each of the 39 counties. Each county has an auditor who's responsible for counting the ballots. And in King County, it's different. They have an elections supervisor that's elected there. And so that's a little different setup there, but basically does the same role as the auditor does, but that's only her role there. And so that's who counts them. That's how it works. Doesn't mean they count them well, doesn't mean they count them right, but that's who counts them. Let's see. There's a question from Jeremy here. Do we stand a chance with illegal immigration on the West Coast, or do we need a president and a governor that wants to make a difference? Well, I'm not entirely sure exactly what that question is. Do we stand a chance what with illegal immigration? Illegal immigration is obviously a big problem for a variety of reasons. But it isn't, it's actually, I would say, probably far worse in the southern states right now than it is in other states. It's not that we don't have our fair share of illegal immigration in Washington state. It's just not the percentage impact that I think we're seeing it in other places. But that'll ultimately end up being a national solution more than anything else, I think. There's a question here, another one from Jason. Question, where do you see Seattle and its government going in the future? Is crime improving? Almost forgot. Hope you had a great Memorial Day. Thank you, Jason. I did have a good Memorial Day. As anybody watching this, I actually got my hair cut and I did a ton of yard work outside. That's why I look like I've got a little bit of sun. But the question about Seattle itself is having a lot of problems. I mean, the biggest thing I think crime is probably one of the big issues that's affecting Seattle. And as much as the Seattle Times wants to pretend it's not happening, and the city councils want to deny that it's happening, all you have to do is live there and talk to anybody who lives there and know that there's a lot of problems with crime in Seattle. One of the problems is I think this effort recently to suppress crime statistics that's definitely going on in Seattle and putting a lot of pressure on the police to kind of suppress crime statistics, and the inevitable fact that happens that when they get a lot more crime and there's not enough police, or they don't respond, or they can't respond, or nothing happens when the criminals get caught, there's a tendency that people just don't report a lot of the crime, kind of like Detroit or even in Chicago and places like that. And, it's a common problem. San Francisco, for example, they just don't report the crime, and so it artificially deflates the crime statistics because it makes it seem like, oh, there's not that much more crime. It isn't hard for you to go see. Just go park your car in Seattle and see what happens to it. And watch what's happening in the stores with the theft, or just the stories of some of the more violent crime that's occurring up there. The basic crime stats show that crime is increasing. Quality of life is affected directly by that. I'm sure if you live in a Microsoft enclave or an Amazon enclave, where you have a gated community or you're protected with your private security or something, you're probably not seeing the same kind of crime that the rest of the people see. Crime is in its beginning stages, I believe. One stuff that we're really seeing right now, it affects lower income, middle income sort of people first, most. If you live in an apartment complex, you'll understand that crime is a significant issue because you're probably experiencing it more than some rich Microsoft-y or Amazon person who's living in a 7,000 square foot house with a 5-car garage. They probably don't see the same level of crime, and even if it hits them, it doesn't affect them in the same way. If you have a catalytic converter stolen off your car, and if you're at Microsoft, if you're a Microsoft employee, you can laugh about it and do a post and say that it's a bad day. It gives you something to talk about with your friends in your vacation. But if you are dependent upon that car to get to your job, and that is a massive financial impact to you, and you live in an apartment complex, East Hill, Kent, that's going to be that'll hurt you a lot. And frankly, I don't think our elected officials, for the most part, care at all. They're really very hard-hearted on the victims of crime right now, and they don't seem to be paying attention to the significance of it. But there's always this lag effect. And so Seattle, I think, is going to see, you're already seeing vacancy rates on the commercial property side of things in Seattle that's getting pretty low. You're seeing a collapse in basic real estate values in Seattle that are dropping. But I think all these are lagging indicators. And so as that crime wave kind of hits more and affects people more, you're going to see the lag effects that are undeniable. By the time the city council finally admits that there's a problem, it'll be much, much harder to fix. And of course, it just gets exported. Cristiano, you got a question here. What does it take to move our capital from Olympia to say, let Point Roberts? That's funny. For those of you who don't know where Point Roberts is, it's actually this weird peninsula that starts in Canada, but the tip of the peninsula sticks out into Washington. It's across. It's technically it's part of Whatcom County, all the way at the top. If you ever see a map that's detailed, you'll see it there. If you've ever been to Point Roberts, it's a beautiful place, but you'd have to come there by boat if you want to avoid going through customs, going up in Canada and driving around. I think the last time I went there, I drove around to visit it. Point Roberts would be funny because it's just this isolated little peninsula. Stick the state capital up there. That'd be funny. To move the state capital from Olympia would be incredibly difficult, almost impossible. It is the origins of Washington. There was a big fight around statehood as to where they were going to put the capital. And it was mainly the big fight was Seattle versus Olympia, if I remember right. Olympia is an improvement over Seattle for sure. It was an attempt to just, spread things out a little bit more in the state. And I'm simplifying it. It was a little more complex than that, but it would be almost impossible. I can't even imagine it being that there's a legal. You'd have to really spend a lot of time. It's easier to separate and split Washington in a couple states than it would be to turn to not have Olympia be the capital. Let's see. Hawk fan asking a question. Not sure if it's been asked. What were your thoughts on the DeSantis announcement? Well, I mean, we've obviously had a bunch of people announced for president. I am generally not super engaged in the presidential drama of politics so much. Normally I'm not. I was a Ted Cruz fan. And so I did jump. I was in the Ted Cruz campaign in Washington state really early on back in 2016. So I really started, I think, 2015 when I was involved in his campaign. And that was really one of the only presidential campaigns that I've been involved in, at least in recent years. When I was a college Republican, I worked on a couple campaigns, but that's the last one I was involved in. Right now, I mean, it's anybody but the crazy lefties that we have in charge. So I'll take any Republican running right now over any Democrat that's going to be running for office. But you've got a lot of people out there. I've liked what DeSantis has done in Florida. I think that's great. I'd like to see more governors be a little bit more bold in some of their local policies. That would be good. But, he's jumped in. People were predicting it. They were expecting it. The Twitter announcement, I realized, had some technical difficulties, so that's kind of a big deal. But anyway, he's just another guy that's announced. We'll see how it goes. A lot of these people that announced to run for president, just like you see when they people announced to run for governor or any other things, running for office is very different. If you've already run for office before, you at least got the process down, so it's not so much of a surprise to you. But if you've never run for office, I don't think you understand what's involved or what it's like to do that. One of the reasons why, when I was doing a lot of training for candidates in the past when they're going to run for office, and I would encourage them to run for a local office like school board or city council or port commissioner or fire commissioner, something to start out with, it's that you need that experience of going through that process and then getting familiar with Robert's Rules of Order and just how to deal with the administrative state a little bit before you run for a higher office. It's in 80% of the time, right? That's really going to help you a lot. You're going to be more familiar with the process of running, of what a campaign actually looks like, what it feels like, what it's like to be the guy on the ballot. Even if you've been around other political campaigns before, it's a different feeling. I've run for office a few times myself, both successfully and unsuccessfully. And it's hard to explain until you've been there what it's like to be that person on point. I mean, it's your name on the ballot. It's your name on the flyers. You're the one everybody asks questions to. And if you're comfortable with that, that's fine. But you get you get tons of advice that's very irrelevant to what's going on, but you can get a lot of good feedback too. You meet the best and the worst of people out there. And it can be very personal. A lot of people take it really personally. It's hard to run for office and not take it personally when you're attacked or I don't know. It's a different drama. And a lot of people will think, hey, I'm this level in my business or my workplace. And that's the equivalent of a governor's position. So I'm going to run for governor, or that's the equivalent of a mayor's position. So I'll run for mayor. And it's not always the case. Just because you're a good businessman, just because you're good at whatever it is that you do, in the private sector doesn't mean that's going to necessarily translate into effective political leadership. And you will be stunned and amazed at the volume of people that come around to influence you. And a lot of people can't handle that, I don't think. So it's not as easy a process as I think it looks like from the outside. Let's see. There's a question here from Jeremy. Will you be in the Tri-Cities anytime soon? And will you be running for governor or Senate? Number one, I'm not going to be running for governor or Senate. That's for sure. I have zero interest ever in going to DC. Completely zero interest. I actually had, when I graduated from college, and because I'd done a lot of political activism in college at the time, I did have offers to go live in DC and work for a variety of different elected officials at the time. And I had zero interest. I'd been to DC. I've been to DC before. No interest. Just wanted to come home. Love Washington State. I wanted to get back off the East Coast. I was done with the East Coast. I just wanted to come home. So no interest in ever being in DC. It would have to be something amazing for me to go back there and work. I can't imagine what it would be. Governor, I'm not interested in either, but I'll tell you what I would do is if we got a real governor, a good one that was elected to office who wanted to downsize government for real. I think I mentioned this before. My dream job is to go in and be the guy cutting government because I believe that I would actually do that. I think a lot of people say they would do that and they wouldn't. I believe that I actually would. And I think that there's an intelligent, logical approach to taking the bloated, big, wasteful government that we have today and cutting it down to size to properly serve the needs that actually exist here in our state and to eliminate a lot of the waste. And the majority, there's a huge amount of this completely wasteful. And it would start with firing pretty much the top 3 layers of bureaucracy in all the state agencies. None of those at that point, they're so political and they've been promoted either the Peter principle because they were so bad below, they kicked them up, or they're so corrupt, they're in those positions. I would get rid of all of them to start out with. It'd be a good way to start. Then will you be in the Tri-Cities anytime soon? Actually, I'm going to be in the Tri-Cities tomorrow just for a short time. I'm on my way out to Walla Walla. I'm stopping in there to do a radio show. Kona Radio, I think is the name of it, tomorrow at 3:00, if I'm correct. Assuming everything lines up, that's right, and I get there at the right time, I'm planning to do a radio show in studio while I'm in Tri-Cities just briefly on my way to Walla Walla. The question, in your opinion, has the Blake decision fixed anything with the open-air drugs in the cities? I'm assuming that you're talking about, this is a question from Jason, I'm assuming that you're talking about the Blake fix, which was the recent legislative special session that they went into to allow cities or counties to be able to have some level of criminalization for some type of drug possession charges so that they can help convince drug addicts to detox one way or the other, imprison if they refuse to go to a program, but preferably in a program. And we'll have to see. We don't know. The original Blake decision, if that's what you're referring to, which is a Supreme Court case that basically decriminalized hard drug possession, made it much worse, of course. And if you're dumb enough to do like what Oregon's done, where they've just legalized all drugs, then based on the crime and the nastiness that Portland's turning into down there, I don't think it helps at all. I don't think anybody would want to be involved in that. There's a question from TZ here. Do we have election observers? And the answer is yes. Both parties, actually, it's interesting. Both parties are allowed to send election observers in, and then the League of Women Voters is allowed to send election observers in theoretically as an independent group, but they really aren't. They're really an appendage of the Democratic Party. But all these groups can send in election observers. And so you can be an election observer. I would recommend, if you care about elections, volunteer this year, right now. Go through the training at the auditor's office. Get familiar with that process. Is the more people we have inside the auditor's office, paying attention to everything, looking at everything, questioning everything, the better off we are. One of the upsides of the 2020 election was this huge influx of people who wanted to be election observers and who cared about the election process for literally the first time in, I think, 100 years on our side being the freedom and liberty side. We actually had people who cared. I tried to do election reform issues in the past before 2020 and nobody cared. It was just the empty seats. Nobody was involved, but they are now. That's good. So there's a question here from Jason. What would you do to improve the transit system, such as Sound Transit? Well, the light rail is a disaster, a complete squander of resources at every level. It's hard to actually fathom a way you could waste more money and get less value than sound transit right now, at least the way the light rail system's put in. I'd probably downsize or eliminate that almost completely. Bus rapid transit gives you at least the best option if you're going to have some kind of a public transportation program. Buses are more adaptable. You can move them around a little bit. Smaller buses are actually a little bit more practical in some cases, and you don't have to really change the overall infrastructure. It's one of the weaknesses of 18th century technology, kind of where they implement this, the train system the way we have it, 19th century technology, but and then pretend like it's new. There's really not a lot of value, especially the way that we implement sound transit, the light rail system here. But I think emphasize a little bit more on the bus side of things. You can't let drug addicts turn your buses into mobile drug labs. I used to take the bus when I was a kid from my house and I used to take up SeaTac Mall or South Center or down to Seattle even occasionally back in the day. And it wasn't that there weren't weirdos on the bus. There certainly were. But it didn't seem to be a crazy choice to take the bus to go anywhere. And now when you get on the bus, especially in King County or in some of those other runs up there, it's a nightmare. And it's as bad as sometimes being the subway back when I was in college in the late 80s, early 90s in New York City. It's just terrible. So if you're going to do that, you're not going to have a public transportation system to discuss. What are the main things? Here's a question. What are the main things we should prepare for in the upcoming legislature next year, especially gun-wise? So Second Amendment issues, I imagine. I don't know if there's going to be a big push of additional anti-gun legislation this next session. The Democrats will never do anything that protects you more. So they're not going to try to improve your Second Amendment rights at all. You'd have to have a Republican majority to do that. And we don't going into this next session. But it's also the short session. The budget was the big fight this last time. In a way, I kind of don't expect to see a lot Second Amendment wise, mainly because there's so many lawsuits in process right now. So I think that's just what's going on right now. I would really be paying a lot more attention to whether Bob Ferguson tries to get his Ministry of Truth program up and running again. My guess is that he doesn't want to push it because it makes him look absurd and ridiculous and open to public ridicule, which he deserves, of course, because he tries to push it. This Ministry of Truth idea through. It got killed this last legislative session. Technically, he could probably bring it back. That would be one I'd watch for. I'd probably watch for anything that they try to do, kicking more money into public education right now. There's been such an exodus of kids from the public education system and a complete and total collapse in every measurable way of all standards and the quality of education in the state at a public school level. So there's probably going to be some drama associated with that as it's become more obvious. It's hard to deny that or pretend like that's not happening. So I would expect something in that area to be involved. It really depends. The legislative agenda is going to be determined by the Democrats for the most part. So it kind of depends on what the flavor of the month is there. You imagine the Borg, that's kind of their approach. So group and hive mind thinking, and I don't know what the hive mind is going to come up with by that time. But the short session, because there's elections that fall, tends to be the lower drama issues. They tend to avoid that as much as they can. The Hawk fan had a question more how the DeSantis announcement was done through social media. I like the new age approach after the kinks got worked out. Okay, so that's a good point. Yeah, I like the fact that DeSantis did kind of cut out the traditional media for his announcement. I think that's fine. That's kind of an indication, despite the glitches, that is an indication of where things are going. I think the traditional media, I recently saw a survey, and I'm sure many people watching this show right now, you might have seen some of the same surveys where it basically shows that the average American, the majority of Americans view the media as the enemy. I mean, not even like just incompetent and corrupt, but I mean, completely the enemy of freedom and liberty and the enemy of America, because they essentially exist to defend the state and the bureaucracy. They're not actually questioning authority ever. They'll question Republicans, which is great, but they won't question Democrats, and they just support the bloated state, whatever it is. That's changing the way people view the media. If you have so many people who have lost all who don't believe there's any credibility at all with the media, then the media is cratering, right? Nobody's paying attention, nobody watches, nobody listens, certainly nobody believes what they're being told. And that ultimately does result in some kind of change going down the road. You can't think that that's not going to happen. One of the problems, I think, sometimes on the conservative liberty side is we still think the media matters, and they're rapidly becoming less. They're rapidly mattering less, more all the time. Their viewership's collapsing. Nobody cares. They're subsidized certainly by the traditional advertising and all that, but I just don't see that they're going to be around, not in the current makeup that we have today. What's amazing is that the corruption of the media should be opening the door even more to independent journalism of some kind, and I think it is. It's just that the censorship push for the establishment media, because they don't like the fact they're being cut out, is the more disturbing element of this whole process. The traditional media today, CNN, AP, all these groups are supporting censorship because they realize new media is going to eat their lunch. And so that's why they're pushing it. And that's definitely a significant issue. Jeremy, what is your opinion about Donald Trump? I mean, I don't know exactly what that means. I lived in New York City when Donald Trump was a land developer. When he originally filed in 2016, I had two policy differences with him right away. And to be honest, I don't remember thinking I voted for Trump in 2016. I don't remember thinking though that he was going to be elected. I was a Cruz guy, and so I was supporting Cruz, and I don't remember paying much attention to Donald Trump actually until the end of that election cycle. But I did significantly disagree with him right out of the gate on two policy issues, and I think I'm still in disagreement with him on these. One is eminent domain. The abuse of eminent domain. I disagree with it. He tends to support it. I disagree with it. And the other one is civil asset forfeiture, which he seemed to endorse. And I think it's a terrible idea, ripe for abuse. And I think it's been abused a lot by the state. So those were just two things that I knew I disagreed with. Now, listen, here's the reality. Politicians who get elected, you're going to disagree with them. And that's just the way it is. So biggest weakness that I think Donald Trump had when he was president was not downsizing the state in the way that he should have. He should have really cut the expenses of the state down a lot and downsized it when he had the chance. And I think failing to do that was a big problem for him moving forward. I'm totally aware of all the drama and the undermining and the unfair treatment and all the crazy stuff that actually did legitimately go on there. And of course, now we know with all these the reports have come, the Durham report and everything else, we know just how corrupt the state was in taking Donald Trump down. For the life of me, it's amazing how crazy. Try doorbelling in Democrat areas and ask people about Donald Trump. They're rabid. Like, people will foam at the mouth about him. And that to me is amazing. I'm not a super fan, and I'm not foaming at the mouth about Donald Trump. He's better than any of the Democrats. If he's willing to fight, I think that I can see why people are inspired by him. He and I would probably disagree on policies here and there. But it's just interesting to me that I don't tend to put my faith in individuals as much unless I really know them personally. And so I'll support whoever's going to advance the freedom and liberty agenda. I don't really care exactly who they are. If they're going to promote it, that's great. And if they're going to promote it more than somebody else, that's the person I want to go with. But we'll just have to see. I mean, we're early days still in the primary, and we'll see who gets through the whole process. Rob had a question here. How do you feel about Bob Ferguson being our next governor? Don't like Bob Ferguson. Bob Ferguson doesn't like me. He'd be a terrible governor. Probably one of the worst ones we'd ever have if he was to get next governor. Now, I'm going to tell you that Tony made a comment here too about Sideshow Bob's campaign isn't starting off too hot. And that's true. And I think he's flailing around much more than I expected. But there's also division on the Democrat side. Republicans are not, right, so far, Republicans are not making a difference in the governor's race. It's pretty early. But the Franz versus Ferguson fight is epic in a lot of ways. And I think people don't appreciate how much Hillary Franz, the current public lands commissioner, her ties to money and the political establishment, especially up in the Seattle area, how tight those ties are and how deep they are. So she's going to be stabbing Ferguson in the back constantly. And I would expect a massive fight behind the scenes, mostly. The media will keep itself out of it until they've been told to engage aggressively. But Bob's made a lot of enemies. Bob Ferguson has. And so we'll see what happens. Do you think Keene Keenan, do you think Republicans will ever be relevant in Washington state again? Of course they will. This is just foolish ignorance of history, shocking ignorance, I think, on my part, when I hear people say stuff like that, because that's really not the way the political cycle goes. It does go in waves. It doesn't become like this perpetual, endless Orwell's vision of a boot in your face for the rest of your life. That's not really how things typically go. And I don't see that's likely to go that way. That is the exact same question that people were asking in 1993 before the Republicans swept in Washington state. Same question that they'd asked years earlier when Republicans swept in 30 years before then, and then 30 years before that, and going back pretty cyclically. It's just one of those issues. So they have to make themselves relevant. We do need better Republican leadership in the sense of better communicators and who give people a reason to vote for them. I don't know why this is particularly a mainstream Republican thing, and I despise it because it's the most defeatist, negative way to depress anybody is to go listen to a mainstream Republican presentation where they basically want to convince you to vote for them because they are not quite as crazy as the Democrats, but they don't believe in anything strongly enough that you can recognize freedom and liberty in anything they say. Somehow they're in this murky middle, and they think that murky middle is good enough that for some reason somebody would want to vote for them. And I don't think that's generally an inspiring reason to get people to vote for you. But maybe that's why the mainstream Republicans generally don't like me. But then again, people call me a rhino because somehow I'm not perfect in some other way. So I just don't. It's a silly way to look at things. Know what you believe and why you believe it, and present yourself for who you are. People will, I think, support candidates even if they disagree with them on some things, provided that they feel like they're genuine and truthful to what they actually believe and what they're promoting. And if the majority of that's what you want, then that's what you go. Then that's what you'll get. There's is Evergreen State as bad as you mentioned in one of your videos? Kramer graduated from there. I'm not sure who Kramer is specifically that you're referring to, but this was a question from Cristiano. Yes, Evergreen State actually is probably far worse than anything I've ever represented in my videos. The Evergreen State College is kind of a joke, and I realize it's a joke. And it's not about this. It's not about the students necessarily who go there. They're abused and part of this process. Somebody sold them on the fact that Evergreen State College was a real school, and so they're stuck. And there's no standards, right? They'll accept anybody. You don't have to be literate. You don't have to speak English. All you have to do is be alive. And I'm not even sure that I think they'll accept people even if you aren't. So what happens is you have incredibly low standards. You're accepting people into an environment that's bizarre and strange, that doesn't give grades, that was an experimental education system set up long ago, that hates free speech, that spends its time navel-gazing, self-obsessed about every little variation of the wokester leftist agenda they can possibly come up with. People are angry. They hate each other. They hate everybody. It's a shockingly weird place, and it's destructive, I think, to send people into that kind of environment and then think that they're going to have a good future going forward. It's not that kids can't thrive in that environment. You can come out anywhere. Listen, I came out of Columbia College, and it didn't ruin me. I thought it was a good experience for me at the time, but it was also a crazy wokester place. There was a North Korean defector who just graduated from my alma mater and said that it was worse than being at North Korea as far as the indoctrination efforts. It's a common theme in secondary education and college, unfortunately, but it is terrible. It's a good school to shut down and end. The experiment failed. It's mostly just a bloated upper bureaucratic administration that the state subsidizes right now. They lose money every year. Their student enrollment's gone down 50, 60% now. They've had 4 rounds of staff layoffs. And as they crater into the ground, there's a certain point in time, why do you even keep that place open? We could use that campus, which is owned by the state now. We could use that campus for something better. Detox for drug addicts, all kinds of things that would be far better. I would make a great voice in DC. I'd probably be silenced immediately, censored, and thrown out of DC. Well, that's funny. Somebody had a question about that, but you're right. That's probably what happened to me. Jason got a question here. Thoughts on Sideshow Bob's campaign so far? It's weak. It got off to a weak start. I'm hoping that it continues to flail along, and that Bob Ferguson, not only does he not become governor, it'd be great to have him out of the AG's office. Although I'm a little concerned that we don't have any good person running for the AG's office yet that I'm aware of. There's a question here. Did you hear Bill O'Reilly call Jayapal a lunatic? Loved it. I didn't hear that, but he's hardly the first. And pretty much to know her is to know that she's insane and crazy. And having her out there demonstrate just how insane and crazy somebody from Seattle can be when they're elected to office is worthwhile, but it's hardly a sales pitch for our state. Let's see. It doesn't matter. Let's see. There's a question here from Rob. It doesn't matter. Bob Ferguson doesn't have to do anything. We don't have a vote in Washington state, and you can't convince me we do. Well, okay. Sorry, Rob. Not voting is not impressive. It's nobody cares that you aren't going to vote. Maybe somebody can steal your ballot and vote for you, but you're really not achieving anything by not voting. I think that's just the laziest approach to anything that we can have out there. There's a question from James and Amy. Have you heard if Culp is planning or running for governor again? Who are the Republican candidates so far? I've done a video on this, by the way, and I don't think it's changed too much since the last time. I could look it up on the PDC just to verify. Because remember, the governor's race isn't until 2024. So anybody running right now, they're about 18 months ahead of the curve, at least for the general election, and about 14 months or so ahead of the primary election. And so the only way you'd know if somebody's running for office is if they file with the Public Disclosure Commission and they're raising funds running a campaign. So based on that criteria, you have two Republicans that are essentially running so far. Semi Bird, who has declared quite a while ago, and Raul Garcia, both of them from Eastern Washington, both of them from the Tri-Cities area. Semi is actually former military. I have not spent a lot of time talking to Semi. We've only actually talked in passing a few times. Good guy on the school board. He's done good things in that area, big fights that he's had there. I like that background. I like his growing up in a tough environment that he has. And I know Raul Garcia is originally from Cuba, came to America. Also, he's a doctor down in the Tri-Cities, also an interesting background. I haven't seen people throw mud back and forth yet. So those are the two guys so far. There had been some discussion about Jim Walsh potentially running for governor. The legislator out of the 19th hasn't declared, so that's not an announcement yet. And maybe he doesn't, so we'll see. But that's what's going on. No word about Culp running for governor again. I suspect when Culp ran for the congressional seat in the 4th congressional district and really didn't do well there. And that's a very conservative district that probably doesn't speak well. Anyway, so that's good. Av Geek Joe, yep, just took Seattle area transit last weekend. Perfectly safe. Glad you survived. I wish more people did. We're really having a lot of problems with Seattle area transits, unfortunately, just the way it is. Let's see. Cristiano asking about the increases in drive-by shooting. Feels like we're one step away from another interstate sniper like the one in DC. I don't know. I mean, you always have crazies that'll go do stuff. When I was in high school in the 80s, drive-by shooting was much more common back then, I believe, than it is now. Those things kind of come and go in waves. Frankly, they have more to do with gang activity in your area than anything else. And so if you let the gangs come in and you don't enforce laws and you let drug selling and drug dealing become a dominant way of making money in your neighborhood, then you're going to and then let them fight over each other, you're going to have a lot more drive-by shooting. It doesn't help that it doesn't help actually that we had two legislators, two Democrats, who thought it was infinite wisdom that they want to propose reducing penalties for drive-by shooters to make it less so that they don't get into much trouble when they commit drive-by shooting. It's ridiculous. But I don't know about a DC sniper. I hope we don't have anything like that. Always be prepared. But you do have to enforce the laws. I think you have to enforce them rigorously against truly violent criminals, and especially criminals who keep committing crimes. They need to go to prison and stay there. So what would I do? There was a question here. What would I do with the Evergreen campus if you had the power? Well, I've definitely shut down the college. I'd be happy to train the professors there, just like they used to train loggers to become coders. If the professors don't have anywhere else to go, I'd like to train them to help drug addicts in recovery. or to have them help mental health patients. I think there's a lot of things you could do with that campus that would certainly be better than how it's being used now. But I would probably lean more towards the drug detox side of things because that's a clear need that we have in the state. Um, do you know? Okay, there's a question. Do you know anything about the lost and found 83K that went to LGBTQ? I don't know actually what you're talking about there. $83,000, or are you talking about 83,000 people? I don't know what you're talking about. There's a question, gun question for you. What's your experience between Beth polymer AR lowers, and have you ever used a KE Arms KP15? I don't think I have. I mean, I've had a lot of experience with ARs, but I have not had too much trouble with them, but not a lot of experience with polymer. They've usually been, machined for the most part, aluminum for the most part, right? But, or steel, depending on what the situation is. But I haven't had a lot of experience with polymer AR lowers either. Probably, I know I've fired a number of them, but it's nothing particularly significant that comes to mind with those experiences right now. Let's see, Seattle. Let's see if you get into, focus on downtown crime is unfair. Okay, there's a question here for Stephanie about it, telling me that focusing Seattle's bigger than the downtown issues, and it is. If you get out into the residential areas, there's a lot of good people and good neighborhoods, and focus on downtown crime is unfair. Perhaps. I mean, here's the thing. Whenever you have an urban environment that just collapses, as a downtown Seattle or Portland's become, to think that the criminals that are being kind of collected and concentrated in that area, to think that they won't leave that area and prey on other people outside of the urban core is just delusional. That's what they do. They're going to come out and hit your nice residential areas. And there are a lot of good people up there. I've spent time visiting myself. I have friends that live up there. It doesn't make them bad people. They're just future victims for what's growing and what they're allowing to grow in the downtown Seattle core. And it is, they need to think about who they're electing to office and what their policies are that they're pushing there. Those residential areas are being abused because of some of the zoning changes that Seattle's trying to do, where they're not going to allow single family housing in Seattle any longer. And so those neighborhoods are going to rapidly decay with that kind of an approach that's being taken. So anyway, you'll just see how that goes. There's another question here about, did I hear about how Bob Ferguson's endorsement by Carmen Best backfired? I did not, but now you make me want to look that up. So I will look that up. Okay, Cristiano, you're mentioning that Kramer was Michael Richard, who played in Seinfeld. Okay, I wasn't sure if that's who you're talking about. There's some other people that graduated from Evergreen that were fairly well known, but not a huge number of them, and a lot fewer number, I think, moving forward, especially with the way the school is collapsing right now. There's a comment here about the guy who travels in an RV. I've actually posted links to that video before, who graduated from Evergreen State College. Yeah, he does have some fun stories about Evergreen, but he's just one of them. There's a lot of them, I think, that have gone there. And I had an intern from Evergreen State College. I was allowed to speak there one time to a campus classroom, and the students were fine. Actually, they were peppering with a lot of questions. It was the professors who got angry because students stood up and said, "Hey, these are things that I'm a 6-year, getting ready to graduate after 6 years here at the school. And how come I've never heard anything that you're talking about before? It's all new to me." Well, it's because you live in a brainwashed campus where monothink, Borg thinking is the only part that's allowed by the people who run the university or the college, and that's all you're going to ever get there. But of course, Western's not much different right now, and a lot of the other campuses have kind of gone down that road, including my alma mater at Columbia. It's not that great. So if you're going to send your kids to college, they need to be rock solid in what they believe and who they are, and they need to be just strong people, I think, for the most part, because otherwise, if you're weak and you're easily influenced, you're going to just be really damaged in that environment. Question from Jamal here. Do you think Kim Wyman would return for a Senate run or a 2028 run for governor, since she's a high profile Republican in the state? I don't think that's likely. I mean, Kim Wyman got recruited away by the Biden administration and pretty much burned her bridges with most of the Republicans in the state. The Democrats didn't like her. It's not like George Soros tried to recruit people to run against her 3 times. So she's kind of in this gray zone where She's not going to get support from pretty much anybody if she runs. I don't know why, because she was the last Republican to be elected statewide. That's why her name is going to rise top, top of the list. But maybe a federal Senate seat she would have a better chance at. But you got to remember the way the Democrats try to portray Kim Wyman as a moderate Republican, she's going to instantly be Satan and Hitler wrapped into one when she decides to run for a Senate seat or some kind of seat in a position like that. So the experiences that she's had in the past on a relatively ignored seat, which Secretary of State was, then it's just not the same experience. And it would be brutal and nasty. And I don't know if she'd be prepared for that. Let's see. There's a question here from Valerie. There's not necessarily an unacceptable question, but it's, will Washington State welcome CBDC fiat system? As a senior with direct deposit, will I have a choice? So I don't know. I mean, these electronic systems, that basically electronic money and stuff, there's a bunch of issues there. I don't know that Washington will go down that road. I just don't know. So we'll have to see. But I'm not aware of that being a big hot topic. I realize they had the big argument in this last Senate bill that came out, but I don't think that's going to be super. I don't think that's going to be top of mind in the fight coming up, mini fights coming up. Have you heard any agendas to use Nacelle Youth Campus? Yeah, that's become a fairly big deal. There's always going to be agendas whenever you hear a big fight like this. And I think that this has been one that Representative Walsh has been involved in. And I think the Republican legislators and the senator from that district has been involved in. And it's been undermined repeatedly, some of the options that they've been looking at how to use that campus. And whenever I see something like that, where there seems to be community buy-in for one idea and it keeps getting shot down, that usually tells me that there's some special interest that has plans for that campus. I don't know who they are, and I don't know what it is yet, but that would make an interesting video in the future, I think. I believe it would. Let's see. Question. Clark College in Vancouver has a bunch of RVs and drug labs parked out front. Does Washington law permit this behavior? Well, that is common all over the place, of course. With the RVs and the drug labs, I mean, it's ridiculous. I just passed a few places up in Tacoma not that long ago. I've seen these places all over, on campus or off campus, right? It's Washington state law doesn't specifically permit this behavior. The question is, what do they do about people who do this kind of stuff? And the answer is in most jurisdictions is very little now. Some jurisdictions are going to be better than others. So you can have some law enforcement that takes it seriously and they're going to crack down on that. Others will not. And the excuse, both the others who don't, they're going to blame the state. They're going to say, well, the state's not giving enough support or the law or whatever. But I think that if you actually have things like that going on, it's because your local law enforcement's decided to allow it to occur. And if they're allowing it to occur, they usually allow it to occur because the local elected officials don't have the spine to actually get out there and find a solution to the problem and end it. And that's usually because there's crazies on the left in the grant grifting homeless industrial complex that has no desire to fix any of this stuff. They want it to be worse. The worse it gets, the more money they get. I don't know how much drug cartels have to do with some of this stuff, but they probably have some influence. So there's a lot going on. There's a question here from Rob Campbell. What do you think about the 2000 Mules, the movie? I like the movie. I like Dinesh D'Souza generally. And I think I like his willingness to do movies like this. What was fascinating to me is that they really did a good job, like with the cell phone tracking data. And it's funny to see the reaction of the media to that particular movie. It was a completely freak out panic about that movie because in Dinesh D'Souza's movie, they did a good job documenting this clear evidence of vote harvesting and depositing all these ballots everywhere. And it was really impressive. I thought it was great. I love the movie. I love the fact somebody was willing to do that kind of work and that they're willing to spend the money to get that cell phone tracking data, because that's expensive, even though it's anonymous. They don't know specifically, but by watching that type of pattern of behavior, they really develop something. I think the main thing it means is that people who are committing vote fraud are not going to carry their cell phones with them now. The other thing to remember is in some states, that's not even illegal. Washington, California, that can be done all the time. And muling votes or or ballot harvesting or whatever you want to call it is perfectly legal in our states. And therefore, anybody who cares about freedom and liberty might as well do it too, because that's how they're doing it. I'm being flippant when I say that, but it just, I thought the movie was great. And I don't think people people who are doing bad things in elections realize how many people are watching now for the first time ever. There's a lot of people actually looking at that stuff. Whether they're going to do anything about it, I don't know. So we'll just have to see. So Jason's asking a question. Could you do a video with William Kirk of Washington gun law? Yeah, I'd love to. The studio that is behind me, and it's kind of around me here where I'm doing this live stream right now, is actually set up to do better personal interviews. If you've seen videos on my channel, I've done interviews in the past, and there was a bunch of remodeling going on here in the studio. And so it's now it's actually a bigger, fancier. I'm optimistic that I can do more interviews. I'm hoping to do some more interviews with people who have something to say and that I think my audience would be interested in. So I'd be happy to do that. There's Stephen. Stephen has a question here about, has there been any talk in Washington of adopting a gold or silver based currency? Not to my knowledge. I have not heard that. For real, people who care about that are like it, but I have not heard it being discussed at any serious level in the legislature. State bank, that has been a proposal in the state legislature, but it hasn't gone anywhere. And CBDCs has also been discussed. And yes, I hate it. I think it's terrible. We don't want that type of government control, and we do need other options. So I'm not disagreeing with you, Stephen, that those are good points. Our Meadow, hello. Have you thought about running for any local government office? Yes, and I have. And in 2010, I ran for the assessor's office. Thank God I didn't win. If I knew then what I know now, I would have won. And then I would have been pigeonholed into this job that, I was running on the policy at the time. I was just annoyed by the fact the assessor's office kept assessing my dad's property inaccurately next door. And my dad would appeal it and he'd prevail every time. And so 9 years and then the next year, the assessor would set it to the wrong value again, after my dad had just won the appeal. And so literally my dad had appealed 9 years in a row, prevailed every time. And so I ran on the platform that even government should be able to get it right once a decade. And that's about as high a level of aspirations I thought government could achieve. And so I ran on that platform as a Republican in Thurston County who knew nobody. And I got about 48% of the votes, public record. You can go back and look at it. Doorbelled a lot. Turned out I love doorbelling. I actually like meeting people. I like getting into the details on wonkish policy stuff. I always have. When I did startup companies, I was into that as well. So that doesn't surprise. I mean, that is kind of my personality. And then the next year, there was a position that opened up where I lived on the school board, and I ran for that. The Democrats had a meeting and they said, actually, whatever we can do, we can't let Glen Morgan ever hold public office. And they made a big deal out of the fact I was running for the school board, but I won that pretty easily. I live in a fairly conservative part of Thurston County. Served on the school board, was reelected again 4 years later. And then I had to resign from the school board when I was dealing with so many lawsuits with the state Democrat Party and Jay-Z Knight and the AG's office. I was initiating all these complaints. It was a big high drama in I was going in 2016, I think at that time, 2017. So anyway, I had to resign from the school board at that point in time, just so it didn't blow back and tie up all our time on the school board. In a way, I wish I hadn't now, because there's a lot more interesting things going on in the school board today than there was when I was on at the time. But it was a good experience, and I encourage more people to get more involved in local government if they can. Let's see. Here's a question from somebody that cognitive health. This is funny. So Zane, I'll say, it looks like that's Zane. What are your thoughts on cognitive health and the holding of a public political office? What are the laws, legal resources, and when should they be applied? Well, right now, I'm actually not familiar with cognitive health as it applies to elected officials. There is a law in Washington state where judges can't serve beyond a certain age. And so they're essentially term limited out of office in Washington state by age. And so that's about the closest thing you're going to get to a cognitive health law when it comes and is applied to elected officials. The Democrats would never allow any kind of cognitive test to be passed before you could run for office. for the obvious reason that most of their candidates probably could never pass it. So you just don't have a lot of laws or rules around that, and maybe there should be, but right now there really isn't. There's a question here: could you go on a sidebar with Viva Free and Robert Barnes? I guess I could. I'm not totally sure who they are, but I'd be happy to talk to them if they want to have a presentation. So I think it's a good time to wrap up here. We've been on for about an hour. I do want to get people's feedback on how much you like doing this live stream, how much you don't like it. I'm just trying to get a gauge whether this is an effective communication tool. Tuesday nights are when I would probably do most of my live stream videos. And this is mainly because I'm already in the studio here doing videos usually during the day. So it's easy for me to, and they're generous enough to let me use their facility so I can do this kind of a live stream absolutely afterwards. So I appreciate the feedback. I'm assuming that there's 54 people or so many online right now. I'm assuming that you guys like it. But if there's more people who like this in the future, just let me know. If you have topics you want me to cover, let me know. I'm always happy to try to engage. If you are in Walla Walla on Wednesday, which is tomorrow night, come to the Republican event. I don't have the notes exactly in front of me, but I'll be speaking there. There can't be that many Republican events going on tomorrow night in Walla Walla, but that's where I'll be. And on Friday night, if you're in Kitsap County, and feel free to come by the Lincoln Day dinner, I'll definitely be there. And very helpful. To see you. Feel free to come up and approach me. I do get approached a lot in public. One of the weird things about being a YouTube guy, which is not somebody that I ever thought I'd be, but as many people watching this video right now know, you feel like you know me because you're hearing me talk a lot of issues, and I think I'm pretty approachable. And so I get a lot of people who approach me in public now over the last few years, especially, where they thank me for videos, and then people I don't even know, right? The Costco gas station attendant, or the somebody in Walmart, or in the parking lot, or at the state track meet. I was there with my son watching the races. I get approached by people all over the place. I love it when you come up, introduce yourself to me, tell me who you are. I like that feedback. It's fun to talk. I think I'm a pretty approachable guy. I like feedback, positive or negative. Either way, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I have a thick skin. That's fine. But I like the interaction. I appreciate, and I'm humbled always by how many people actually watch the video. There's one last question here, and I'll give it to you here. My email is Glen, that's Glen, at wethegovern.com. So that's my email if you want to email me. Don't send me just spam stuff. I get a lot of that already, and sorting it out is always a hassle. But if you have something to say, or you want to talk to me separately via email, that's fine. I'm pretty easy to reach that way as well. Anyway, just give me some of your ideas for next time. I think that's it for now. See you in Walla Walla if you're there Wednesday. See you in Kitsap County on Friday, and otherwise I'll do another one of these next Tuesday. I'm expecting at 5:30, just to kind of keep it on schedule here. And I have 2 videos that should be coming out between now and then. So hopefully you like those as well. And if you want to subscribe to my website, go to wethegovern.com and feel free just to sign up there. It just puts you on my email list when I write articles. I don't post all my videos on my website. I try to post some of them. And I'm trying to catch up. I need to do more on my website. I'm going to kind of go do a refresher on that website to make it a little bit more available. But I hope that's all for this evening. Enjoy a beautiful day out there, because it's beautiful here. And we will see you next time.